Margaret sat quietly in the far left row of the ornate Manhattan recital hall, clutching her purse tightly in her lap. The air buzzed with nervous energy. Young performers tuning instruments, proud parents chatting in low, boastful tones. Every seat was filled with polished shoes, manicured hands, and expensive perfume. She wore a simple cardigan, her shoes a little scuffed at the toes, and no one noticed her as they passed. That suited her fine. She hadn't planned to be here. Her daughter Emily was supposed to play in the intermediate division of the regional youth piano recital. But 3 days earlier, Emily had come down with a high fever, and when Margaret tried to cancel, the event coordinator had told her the spot was non-refundable and already scheduled. After 2 sleepless nights caring for her daughter, Margaret made a quiet decision. She wouldn't waste the opportunity. It had been nearly 25 years since Margaret had played the piano in public. Not since college, not since she turned down the scholarship to Juilliard to take care of her younger siblings after her mother passed away. Life had swept her into its current, pulling her far from the dreams she once held with quiet passion. Now, in her mid-40s, working as a night cleaner in midtown offices, she rarely touched the keys except to teach Emily scales at home. But music had never left her. She played in her head as she walked the city streets. She tapped out melodies on tables while waiting for coffee to brew. Sometimes late at night, she would sit in front of the small upright piano she had rescued from a thrift store and let her fingers remember what her heart had never forgotten. As her eyes scanned the room, she saw sleek-haired teenagers going over their pieces one last time and stage parents giving final pep talks. A young boy in a tailored blazer played rapid arpeggios on an air piano. Margaret pulled her hands inside her sleeves, suddenly unsure if she should go through with it. But she thought of Emily, curled up at home with a blanket over her and tissues beside her. "Play something for me," she had whispered that morning. Something beautiful. Margaret had promised she would. When the announcer finally called her name, there was a slight pause, and then a murmur. The program listed her only as Margaret Fields, with no age or school affiliation. A few people turned to look as she walked toward the stage. One mother leaned toward another and asked, "Is she one of the accompanists?" No one clapped. Margaret stepped onto the stage, her heart thudding loudly. The Steinway Grand gleamed under the lights. She took a moment to breathe, then sat on the bench. Her fingers hovered over the keys. She closed her eyes. The chatter in the audience didn't stop. A few people were clearly scrolling on their phones. Then she began to play. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't fast, but the melody that flowed from fingertips was something raw and soulful, like the echo of something long buried rising gently to the surface. Each note hung in the air like mist, subtle and aching. Slowly, the crowd quieted. People looked up. Phones were put down. Even the judges seemed to lean in, caught off guard. Margaret didn't try to impress anyone. She wasn't here to prove a point. She played for her daughter, for the girl who still believed in her mother's music. She played for the years she spent sweeping floors and sacrificing dreams. She played for the part of herself that she'd packed away long ago. And in that recital hall, among prodigies and polished performers, a simple woman played the truth. As the final notes of Margaret's piece faded into the silence, there was a stillness in the hall that hadn't been present all evening. For a moment, it was as though no one dared to move. Her hands slowly fell to her lap, the soft echo of the last chord lingering in the corners of the grand recital room. Then, gradually, applause began, not loud or immediate, but growing like a slow ripple from the back of the room. People who hadn't looked up from their phones now stared forward, visibly moved. Some clapped with both hands, others hesitated, as if unsure of what they had just witnessed. A few young performers in the audience looked around, their expressions mixed with awe and confusion. They knew technique, they knew precision, but what Margaret had just played was something else entirely, something raw, imperfect, and deeply human. From the judging table, Maestro Caldwell, a renowned concert pianist and the evening's guest adjudicator, slowly rose to his feet. He was not a man known for sentiment. He had once walked out of a student competition halfway through, citing a lack of soul in the sound. But now he stepped forward, his eyes never leaving Margaret. She stood awkwardly, ready to return to her seat, uncomfortable with the attention. She hadn't come for praise. She hadn't expected any. In fact, a part of her had thought she'd be politely ignored and dismissed. She hadn't even thought the judges would comment at all. Before she could take a step, Maestro Caldwell addressed her directly from the foot of the stage. His voice, though calm, carried through the entire hall. "Excuse me, Miss Fields," he said. "Would you mind if I asked, who taught you to play like that?" Margaret hesitated. The microphone wasn't on. Everyone leaned in. She swallowed, then answered simply, "Life did." The audience murmured. Caldwell smiled, something he almost never did at these events. "You have something rare," he continued, "something even the most polished musicians forget. You didn't play to impress. You played to speak. That's what makes it unforgettable." Margaret, unsure how to respond, gave a soft thank you and nodded politely before stepping down and returning to her seat. This time, people looked at her as she passed. Some even smiled. After the final performer, when the evening concluded and trophies were being handed out, Margaret was called back to the stage, not for a trophy, but for something far more unexpected. "We don't normally offer this," Caldwell said, holding a small white envelope, "but on behalf of the New York Conservatory of Music, I'd like to invite you to join our private mentorship program, not as a student bound by exams or performances, but as an artist to continue exploring your voice." Gasps went through the audience. A few of the young performers looked stunned. Margaret, for her part, looked completely overwhelmed. I have a job," she stammered. "A daughter. I'm not sure I can—" Caldwell interrupted gently. "We'll work around your life. You've already proven you don't need a stage to be a musician. You only need a piano and a story." Tears welled in Margaret's eyes. She nodded slowly, then looked out into the crowd. At the very back of the room, she saw her daughter Emily, wrapped in a coat, sitting beside a neighbor who had quietly brought her when she felt better. Emily's eyes were wide, her smile full of pride. She gave her mother a thumbs up. Margaret smiled back through tears. For the first time in decades, she didn't feel like a woman who had missed her chance. She felt like a woman who had just stepped into her second beginning.